The kitchen of Halesford Manor breathed with a gentle warmth that did not belong to most rooms in that vast house. Copper pots glimmered on their hooks like muted coins. The soft glow of candles cast amber pools across the long wooden tables, and the scent of fresh bread clung to the air. It was here, amid simplicity and honest work, that she moved quietly. Alara, the young kitchen maid with eyes like dusk settling over a calm field. Her dress was plain and worn from long days. Her sleeves rolled just enough to show the faint dusting of flour along her wrists. She was not a girl who drew attention. She had been raised to move carefully, to speak only when spoken to, and to accept that some were born in a softness while others lived beneath it. Yet even the meekest soul can become a target. The trouble began without warning. Carried into the kitchen on the sharp heels of Lady Rowena Hartridge, a visiting noblewoman with a smile as polished and cold as the silver buttons on her traveling cloak. She had come searching for the housekeeper, but when she found only Alara tending the simmering pot on the hearth, her eyes narrowed with the faintest curl of disdain. "Ew," Lady Rowena said, her voice dripping with the sweetness of someone who enjoyed bruising gentler spirits. "I should like to know why a servant girl is lurking in the entrance corridor during private conversation. Do you find yourself above your station?" Alara froze, her heart giving a painful flutter. She had merely walked past the corridor to fetch linens left there earlier, not to overhear anyone's conversation. But to explain this to Lady Rowena was to step into quicksand. "I did not mean," she began softly. "Oh, they never mean anything, do they?" Lady Rowena cut in, her voice rising, loud enough for the two scullery maids nearby to stiffen. "Girls like you're always pretending innocence to hide ambition. A wisp of a thing, trying to gather scraps of attention from those above your reach. How very tedious." Heat rose up Alara's throat, stinging her cheeks. Her hands tightened around the wooden spoon she held. Her breath trembled. The whispers began behind her, half curiosity, half fear, because no one interrupted a noblewoman's cruelty. No one dared. The door to the corridor opened with a sudden gust of colder air. And then everything shifted. The Duke of Halesford entered. Tall, composed, dressed in a dark frock coat that fit him with aristocratic exactness, he carried the presence of a man born to command, yet weary of the expectations tethered to his name. His gaze moved lightly over the kitchen, until it stopped, until it held. Alara felt the weight of his eyes before she saw him fully. His expression tightened, a faint crease between his brows forming as he took in the sight of Lady Rowena's raised chin, the tense servants, and Alara's trembling hands. "What," he asked coolly, "is happening here?" Lady Rowena pivoted with a smile, too swift to be sincere. "Your Grace, I was merely correcting an overstep. This girl, this kitchen maid, was eavesdropping where servants have no place. I only offer guidance." The Duke's eyes slid to Alara once more. A question flickered there, tender but restrained. He said nothing for a moment, letting silence make the noblewoman fidget. "My guests," he said finally, "are expected to conduct themselves with grace." She brightened. "Naturally, you're—" "And with mercy." The words struck sharper than steel. A few servants gasped softly. Lady Rowena stiffened. He continued, voice low but unmistakably edged. "Cruelty has no place in my household, no matter how it is dressed." Rowena's face blanched, then flushed. She sputtered something about misinterpretation, but the Duke had already turned away, his attention anchored on Alara, studying her with an intensity that made her chest feel too small for her breath. "Are you harmed?" he asked her quietly. Alara swallowed. "No, Your Grace." Good." His tone gentled slightly, as though he feared bruising her further. "You are to carry on." Lady Rowena's indignation burned behind him like a torch, but the Duke dismissed her with the slightest tilt of his head. She left in a storm of rustling silk. Alara stood motionless until the Duke himself stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I apologize for what you endured. There are those in society who mistake cruelty for refinement." Her breath trembled. The scent of rain lingering in his coat brushed her senses, though the night had been clear. "Thank you, Your Grace, but I do not wish to cause trouble." "You did not," he replied. "And should any say otherwise, they will answer to me." For a heartbeat, one stolen, fragile heartbeat, his eyes softened as if he were studying more than her words, as though he were memorizing the quiver in her lashes or the strength it took for her to lift her chin despite trembling inside. He stepped back, his composure returning like a cloak settling over his shoulders. But something had changed. A thread, thin as candle smoke, now stretched between them. Later, when the dinner hour approached, the Duke returned to the kitchen under the pretense of checking on the evening's arrangements. He asked after menus, candle placements, tasks that did not require his presence. Yet his gaze always drifted back to her, the quiet girl standing near the long wooden table, smoothing her apron, avoiding his eyes as though his attention were too bright to bear. "You need not be afraid," he said when she finally met his gaze. "I am not afraid," she whispered, though her pulse told another story. A faint smile touched his lips, gentle, almost rueful. "Your courage is louder than you realize." Her breath caught. No one had ever said that to her. Not once. She had been called quiet, obedient, forgettable, but never courageous. He reached forward then, slow and deliberate, brushing a grain of flour from her wrist with the back of his knuckle. The touch was feather-light, but it shattered something fragile inside her. A warmth coiled beneath her ribs, unfamiliar yet aching with its own sweetness. His jaw tightened at the moment of contact, as if even that brief graze had demanded restraint. "You should not be spoken to as though you are less," he murmured. "Not here. Not anywhere." Before she could speak, he turned sharply and strode out of the kitchen, leaving behind the ghost of his warmth and the scent of rain. The servants exchanged glances. Whispers filled the corners of the room like soft smoke. "Why does he look at her like that? I have never seen him defend a servant. It will cause trouble. Mark my words." Alara felt her world tilt, as though the floor beneath her had become unsteady. She did not want attention. She did not want danger. Yet remembering the way his voice, gentled for her alone, made her heart betray her. When the kitchen finally quieted, she sat at the long table, staring at her wrist where his knuckle had brushed away the flour. The room felt too still, too intimate with the echo of what had lingered between them. Outside the kitchen door, hidden from her sight, the Duke had stopped. One hand braced against the doorframe, shoulders taut, as though holding back something fierce and ungovernable. His breath escaped in a low whisper meant for no ears but his own. "Why her, why now?" Alara lifted her gaze toward the door at that exact moment, not knowing he stood beyond it. Her voice trembled into the empty room. Why would a man like him care at all? Neither heard the other speak, yet the same question lived in both hearts, trembling like a candle flame caught between longing and fear. And upstairs, unnoticed, unseen, Lady Rowena listened from the shadows of the stairwell, her expression sharpening as a single thought formed. This will not do. Morning arrived with a hush, the kind that clings to the stone walls of great houses before the day fully wakes. Pale light slipped between the kitchen windows, softening the shadows that lingered after a restless night. Alara entered quietly, her steps slow, her thoughts still tangled around the Duke's voice, its warmth, its firmness, the way it had trembled with something unspoken. She pressed her hands to her apron as though to steady her heart. She had spent half the night wondering whether she had imagined the gentleness in his eyes. She had not, for on the wooden table, near the basket of cooling bread, lay a ribbon. Midnight blue, satin, smooth as still water beneath the moon. It was far too fine to belong in a servant's world. For a moment she simply stared at it, breath held. No one else was in the room. No footsteps moved behind her. No explanation waited in the air. Then she noticed the folded square of parchment tucked beneath the ribbon. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was elegant, unmistakable. Firm strokes softened only at the edges, as though the writer had fought to restrain sentiment. Where whatever gives you courage. No signature. None was needed. Her breath left her in a silent tremor. She closed the note, slipped it into her apron pocket, then hesitated as though the air itself might accuse her. The ribbon felt like a secret pressed against her skin, dangerous, beautiful, impossible. She had barely tucked it away when the door swung open and the staff flooded in, voices rising, pans clattering, the day rushing forward. She kept her head low, afraid someone would see her flustered cheeks or the strange brightness in her eyes. But rumors require no evidence, only breath. By mid-morning, the whispers began once more. He was in the kitchen last night. They spoke alone. She must have done something. No girl receives His Grace's attention for nothing. Alara pretended not to hear, but each whisper tightened around her chest like an unseen hand. Lady Rowena arrived before noon. She swept into the kitchen with an elegance sharpened into cruelty, her eyes gleaming like polished steel. The staff stiffened. Alara froze before she could retreat. Lady Rowena's steps were slow, deliberate, savoring each pause. "I hear," she said, tapping a gloved finger against a copper pot, "that His Grace enjoys wandering down here far more than is necessary. Interesting, is it not?" No one answered. She turned to Alara with a smile that was more blade than warmth. "Do be careful, little maid. A man's pity can feel like affection to a girl unaccustomed to either." The heat that rose in Alara's cheeks was sharper this time. Not merely humiliation, but the sting of injustice. "I have done nothing improper," she said softly. Rowena's laughter was quiet and merciless. "You have existed where you should not. That is often enough." Before Alara could step away, the Duke entered. Silence rippled through the kitchen. His gaze swept the room, settling instantly, inevitably, on Alara. Something fierce flickered behind his eyes when he noticed her tension. Then he turned to Lady Rowena with a politeness carved from ice. "You seem to have made the kitchen your preferred domain," he said. Rowena smiled. "I only wish to ensure your staff performed with proper decorum." "Decorum," he repeated, his tone dangerously soft, "begins with restraint." The kitchen held its breath. Alara dared not lift her eyes, for she feared what hers might reveal. The Duke moved toward the table, his posture rigid, but his gaze warming the closer he came. He asked after the luncheon preparations, but each question was half-hearted, as though his mind wandered elsewhere, toward her. When he finally spoke to her directly, his voice gentled into something that made the staff stare openly. "You need not shrink before anyone," he murmured. Her pulse skittered. "I only wish to keep my place, Your Grace. Your place is not determined by those who look down upon you." Heat gathered behind her eyes. She swallowed it. She could not afford tears. But affection, unexpected, unwanted, and yet desperately needed, shone in his gaze long enough for Rowena's expression to sour visibly. The Duke turned to leave, but something in him hesitated. His hand drifted to the edge of the table. His fingers brushed the wood as though tempted to reach across it. He stopped himself. She did not see the war in his expression, but Rowena did, and she smiled like someone discovering a weakness she intended to exploit. By evening, the scandal had grown legs. During dinner service, an elaborate affair of crystal chandeliers and hushed aristocratic chatter, Alara carried a tray across the room, keeping her eyes trained on the floor. But then she heard it, her own name spoken with feigned sympathy. Poor thing believes he notices her. If she thinks she can command the Duke's favor, the delusion is dangerous. A servant girl should know better. The words struck her like stones. Her grip faltered. A porcelain dish slid from the tray. It shattered, the sound echoing through the grand hall. The room fell silent. She froze. Shame flooded her. Tears pricked at the edges of her vision, not from the breakage, but from the humiliation of being spoken about as though she were invisible. Then the Duke rose from his seat. He crossed the room without haste, each step grounded in quiet authority. And when he reached her, he did something no one in that hall expected. He knelt. He knelt beside a kitchen maid, gathering the fallen porcelain shards in his gloved hands. Gasps fluttered through the room. A nobleman, let alone a duke, did not kneel for anyone beneath his rank. "Your Grace," she whispered hoarsely, "please, you need not." His voice was soft, but sharp enough to draw blood. I will not have you humiliated under my roof." The noble woman who had spoken earlier reddened. Her companions looked away, but the Duke remained focused solely on Alara, as though she were the only soul in the hall. When he stood, he offered her a steadiness she could not meet with her eyes. "Return to the kitchen. Take a moment if you need it." There was a tenderness in the words that tightened the room around them. She fled before tears betrayed her. In the quiet kitchen, her hands shook as she leaned against the table. His touch, his kneeling, his defense, they swirled in her chest like a storm that both terrified and warmed her. The Duke arrived moments later. He closed the door behind him. The room dimmed to the glow of a single candle. Its flame flickered between them, casting trembling gold across the table. "You're not at fault," he said. "I caused a scene," she whispered. No, he stepped closer. "They caused it." Her breath faltered when he leaned slightly forward, his hands braced against the table, his posture too intense, too near. The warmth in his eyes had changed, deepened, sharpened, as though fighting its way out of him. "You must not confuse kindness with favor, your grace," she said, though her voice broke on the words. "Is that what you believe I am offering you?" His voice lowered to a dangerous softness. She could not answer. She feared the truth in her own heart. He leaned closer, his face half lit, half shadow. The candle trembled between them. "You must understand," he whispered. "I have tried to keep distance. I have tried to be cold." Her pulse thundered in her ears. His breath shook, not from anger, but from restraint slowly cracking. "I cannot control myself around you, darling," he whispered, voice raw with the confession he had resisted far too long. "And I fear what the world will do if they see what I feel." The candle guttered. Alara stared at him, breath unsteady, heart splitting between dread and longing. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor, quick, purposeful, and unmistakable. Lady Rowena, drawing closer. The Duke's eyes widened, not in fear, but in decision. He straightened, jaw tightening, gaze blazing with something irrevocable. "Then let them see," he whispered, and the door handle turned. The door opened with a slow, treacherous creak, as though even the hinges of Halesford Manor hesitated to invite the storm waiting beyond it. Lady Rowena stepped inside, flanked by two silent watchers whose expressions hovered somewhere between curiosity and anticipation. Their eyes snapped immediately to the distance between the Duke and Alara. Too close, too charged, illuminated only by a trembling candle flame that cast their silhouettes into a single wavering shape. Rowena's lips curled like a blade sheathed in silk. "How interesting," she murmured. "I feared I would find impropriety. Instead, I find certainty." Alara stiffened. The Duke did not step away from her. He turned only enough to face the intruders, shoulders squared, voice steady with a command that had once quelled entire assemblies of unruly lords. "You enter rooms without permission," he said, "and yet accuse others of impropriety?" Rowena's eyes narrowed. "I enter where the dignity of this house is at risk." The Duke took one deliberate step forward, shielding Alara behind him, not touching her, not claiming her, but forming a barrier of quiet defiance. Light grazed the sharp line of his jaw. His breath, steady but thin, signaled a man holding the line between reason and the raw truth of his heart. "You mistake cruelty for vigilance," he said, "and I will not tolerate it." Rowena's gaze flicked to Alara, dripping with venom. "You a defender still? After all the whispers she invites? After shattering decorum at dinner? A servant girl with trembling hands who imagines your attention is affection." Alara flinched, shame burning across her skin like frostbite. But before she could retreat into silence, the Duke spoke, his voice low and stripped of every defense he had worn until this moment. "She does not imagine my attention." A breathless stillness fell. Even a candle seemed to pause in its flickering. Rowena laughed softly, sharp as glass. "So you admit it. You are enthralled by her. A servant." The Duke's voice shifted, still quiet, but pulsing with a depth that turned the room colder and warmer all at once. "I am enthralled by her dignity, by her resilience, by the way she holds her head despite your attempts to break her spirit." His gaze slid back to Alara, softening. by the strength she does not know she possesses. Alera's breath caught, unsteady, as though her heart had stepped into unfamiliar light. "You cannot mean to let this continue," Rowena hissed. "She will ruin the household, the estate, you." At that, the Duke straightened as though weight had fallen from him rather than upon him. "The only thing that would ruin me," he said, "would be allowing cruelty to decide the worth of someone under my protection." Rowena's expression twisted. "You speak as though she holds some claim on you." The Duke turned his full attention to Alera then, and the world narrowed to the candle between them. The low hum of the hearth, the distant laughter from the drawing rooms, the ticking of clocks, all fell away. He stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of him brushed the cold fear clinging to her skin. Close enough for her to see the storm battling behind his eyes, the battle between duty and desire, restraint and truth. "Alera," he said softly, "look at me." She did. What she saw in his gaze frightened her, not because it threatened harm, but because it promised tenderness she had never been taught to expect from any corner of the world. "I have tried," he whispered, "to keep a distance that would preserve your safety. I have failed." Her breath trembled. "Your Grace, I cannot control what I feel," he continued. "And the more I try to remain distant, the more I realize that distance is the one thing I can no longer bear." Rowena's sharp breath cut through the moment. "This is madness. You place your entire name at risk for a girl who barely lifts her eyes from the floor." The Duke did not look at her. His words were meant for Alera alone. "I do not want your silence anymore," he said, "nor your fear. If you tell me now that you do not want my company, my protection, or my presence near you," his voice fractured at the edge, "I will honor it. I will step back and never burden you again." Her pulse hammered so loudly she feared the entire kitchen could hear it. "But," he continued, voice softening into something unbearably tender, "if you wish me to stay, if you want my presence even a little, I will stand beside you against every whisper in this house, against society's scorn, against anything that dares to wound you." Alera felt her knees weaken. No one had ever chosen her. No one had ever offered their reputation as a shield around her. Her voice wavered like a candle flame. "I am afraid," she whispered, "not of you, but of what others will do to me." His eyes softened with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "Then let me be the one afraid for you." The words sank into her like warmth after a long winter. Rowena stepped forward, snapping the fragile silence. "So, this is your intention? To place a servant girl at your side? To let her change the course of your life?" The Duke turned to her slowly. "She has changed nothing," he said. "She has merely revealed truths I refuse to acknowledge." "And what truth is that?" Rowena spat. "That my heart," he said, steadying his voice with startling conviction, "is not yours to dictate." Rowena's face tightened in fury. "You cannot mean to elevate her." "I mean only," he said, "to treat her as someone whose worth is not measured in titles." He returned his gaze to Alera. The candle between them flickered, its flame bowing toward him as though drawn to his warmth. "Alera," he said, voice barely a whisper, "do you want me to stay?" Her throat tightened. For once, she did not let fear answer for her. "Yes," she whispered, "I do." His breath left him in a silent, reverent exhale. Lady Rowena recoiled, fury sharpening her features. "Then you are a fool," she hissed, "and she's a danger." "No," the Duke said softly. "She is the only truth in this house." He stepped aside, creating a space in front of Alera, not forcing her forward, but making room for her to breathe, to exist without shrinking. The gesture was small, yet monumental. Rowena glared. "The staff will talk. Society will talk. You will be mocked for this indulgence." "I have weathered worse storms," he said quietly. Alera felt something shift inside her, something slow and trembling, like a locked door finally unbolting. She had been small her whole life, surviving in shadows. Now a man who owed her nothing had offered her a place where she did not need to disappear. "I cannot promise," she whispered, "that I will not tremble again." He smiled softly. "Then I will steady you." The watchers behind Rowena exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that whatever spectacle they had hoped to witness had dissolved into something far more intimate, far more irrevocable. Rowena hissed one final attempt at venom. "You will regret this." "Perhaps," he replied, "but I will not regret choosing compassion over cruelty." With a final glare, Rowena swept out, her companions trailing behind, leaving the kitchen a sanctuary again, one illuminated by a single flickering flame and the fragile breaths of two souls standing closer than propriety allowed. Silence settled like soft snowfall. The Duke's voice broke it gently. "I cannot promise you the world's kindness," he murmured, "but I can promise you that you will never face its cruelty alone again." Her eyes filled, though she blinked the tears back with quiet determination. "I do not want promises of forever," she whispered. "Only honesty." "Then honesty you shall have," he said. "I want you in my life, not as a hidden whisper, but as someone whose presence steadies mine." Emotion quivered through her. "And if the whispers return?" He stepped closer, not touching her, but letting the nearness speak. "Then let them whisper," he said softly, "for I will not." The candle's flame leaned toward them once more, stretching tall before bowing gently into darkness, as if carrying the final breath of the moment into the unseen night beyond.